Now, Labour and Employment Minister Thulas Mxesi has gazetted a rise in the minimum wage in South Africa. Starting on the 1st of March, the minimum wage, which includes wages for domestic and agricultural labour, will increase by 8.5% to 27 rands and 58 cents per hour. This implies that the lowest paid workers' monthly earnings would effectively drop to about 4,412 rands and 80 cents if they worked 8 hours a day, 20 days a week. Joining us now to discuss this is Onyi Nwaneri from the Afrika Tikkun. Onyi, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, with the recent minimum wage hike in South Africa, what impacts do you anticipate on the country's economy, particularly considering its current financial challenges?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'd like to say that as Afrika Tikkun, an organization that focuses on developing young people and helping them to access the economy, we are quite elated on the one hand in relation to the increase in minimum wage by 8.5%. We recognize that there is a massive inequality in the country and there is a need to improve dignity of labor and to reduce that inequality. But on the other hand, you are sitting with a country where we've had huge economic challenges, inflation, electricity challenges, businesses struggling, low economic growth. So it's great for the people of South Africa, but for how many people in South Africa? And I think that's the big question. The minimum wage will enable some people live better, but most people not have access. The unintended consequences that there will be less job creation, especially amongst those who are meant to create those jobs, especially within the SMME sector. So we're worried for SMME sector in particular and businesses who are struggling from a growth perspective or even a survival perspective.
Most certainly. I mean, that was certainly my next question to you, in the sense that an increase in that minimum wage could potentially benefit low-income workers in the country. But on the other hand, potential negative consequences could arise from the minimum wage hike in an already cash-strapped economy.
Absolutely. What we do as Afrika Tikkun is that we recruit, we train, and we place young people into economic opportunities. Majority of that economic opportunities that we put them in is small, medium enterprises. Already last year, after the increase of the minimum wage last year to 4,400, we saw SMMEs struggle. We had to find incentives to try and incentivize them to create those jobs. SMMEs are struggling over a lot of issues. They are barely surviving. And to try and increase minimum wage without any recognition of that it can be a one-size-fits-all is a challenging one. The second area that you need to look at in terms of South Africa as a whole is that majority of South Africans have nothing. The South Africa is currently a welfare, progressing towards a welfare state where, a large majority of its population is dependent on grants, especially if you look at the 350 minimum grants. People have nothing. There is an intention. In fact, they would love to have access. And I think there is a conversation around should we be increasing access for more, or should we be looking at improving inequality? And I think it's not an easy decision. And we also know that business, for example, business that would have supported job creation, that would have enabled job creation. We have businesses who do things like youth employment service, for example, who, for example, would create 2,000 jobs in order to enable those jobs for young people to gain work experience through incentives like youth employment service, would go from 2,000 jobs perhaps to 1,500 jobs, which means we have lost 500 jobs that could have been created for young people in a country with close to 65% and 70% unemployment. So the unintended consequence for an economy that is under pressure, for a country that is struggling with a lot of socioeconomic challenges, including access to income on a very basic level, I believe that there should have been some thought around how do we manage minimum wage, which is to solve for inequality, but at the same time access, which is to get a lot of young people and unemployed people into the economy on any level.
I mean, we've heard political parties such as SARA, led by Colleen Makubela, stating that there shouldn't be a blanket approach when it comes to minimum wage. What's your take on having differentiated sectors, differentiated minimum wages that could possibly take care of other spaces where people wouldn't necessarily be able to afford, like you say, with small businesses in South Africa being affected by this increase in them having different rates when it comes to this minimum wage?
Absolutely. If you look at South Africa as a whole in terms of how we do things, from a tax perspective, there is a differentiated tax, understanding that different people have different ability to pay different taxes based on their earning capacity. We have, even in terms of rates and how you pay for electricity, those in suburban areas pay different to those who are in township or rural environments. We already recognize that different people have different ability to be able to afford different things from an economic point of view. We strongly, and not that we're supporting any political parties, but we see as an organization who works on the ground, whose only mission and vision is to solve for unemployment, in particular youth unemployment in South Africa, we really advocate that government needs to relook national minimum wage in a very different way. And we look at it as finding a balance to say, where is our high growth sectors? What sectors are doing really well? And what companies can afford? And therefore look at a national minimum wage that is based on affordability. What part of the economy, for example, small, medium enterprises, who are the biggest, and we keep saying has the potential to create the biggest jobs based on evidence all over the world that small businesses create jobs. How do we then incentivize them? By creating a different or a differentiated approach in terms of national minimum wage. So we definitely believe that not a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. And for a South African economy that is under pressure, there has to be a sensitivity and a balance around what we want to achieve, the ideals we want as a country, and the reality that we face today, and therefore find a balancing approach that ensures that everybody is thought about and avoid and mitigate the unintended consequences.